Hey, hey, students. I wanted to give you a little video here, hopefully that can be helpful on writing the DBQ. And as you guys know, I've just kind of been, we've been doing this really ever since we found out what the AP exam is, and I'm really trying to prepare you guys for what's in store. Okay, so let's just kind of go through a old DBQ question. Maybe look at a few documents, but just kind of the first. I really want to hit on the first step in the process, and this isn't extremely well planned or anything like that. I'm just sitting here looking at how I can help you guys, and I pulled up an old DBQ, and I'm like, okay, let's walk through it. How you would at least get started in making this happen. Okay, so this is from 2018. Let's start with the question. Man, I cannot stress to you how important it is to really address the question, okay, and to answer the question as directly as possible. So number one, the question: evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the expanding role of the United States in the world in the period from 1865 to 1910. Okay, that is the question. So the question clearly has to do with America's role in the world. And so if I were you right now and you were to get this question on your AP exam, I would immediately go to those charts that you guys have worked on for me. I would go to the ones that have to do, and the years might not be exactly the same, but the ones that have to do with from the Civil War era to the early 20th century, and I would go to that section that says America and the world, because that's really what we're doing, right? So pull that up. I'd also grab some key terms and just kind of have all that ready. But I would also begin thinking in your own brain, and maybe, hopefully a lot of this information will just come off the top of your head. You won't need to use those cheat sheets as much, but at least you'll have them there. But the question has to do with America's role in the world, right? And so it's that section of those charts that you're really going to be looking at and thinking about. And so evaluate the relative importance of the different causes for the expanding role of the United States in the world from the period 1865 to 1910. Okay, this is a cause question, right? This question, like so many of them you deals with what are the causes, and it specifically says the relative importance, which all that means is what's the biggest causes, what are less important, So I would definitely, when you answer this question, start with the primary cause or the primary reason for an expanding role of the United States in the world is blah blah blah. But to answer this question well, at the very least, you're going to need to explore and explain multiple causes for why the United States was involved in the world from this time period. And just think big picture. Were there economic reasons? Were there political reasons? Were there social reasons, cultural reasons? Okay, well, what are those reasons? And once there's an economic reason, we wanted to trade because we were industrialized. Well, that's a reason. That's one of your points. Maybe that is the main reason, but maybe there are some secondary social or cultural or political reasons or whatever. Or maybe that in your view, the primary reasons for why we got more and more involved in the rest of the world are political rather than economic. Whatever it may be, that's what you're doing. So it's, once you kind of think about the question, give yourself enough time to think about the question and, simplify it in your brain. Oh, I just need to talk about the causes for why the United States was involved in the world. Don't say in your thesis they got involved for political reasons and economic reasons. No, it needs to be a political reason or a economic reason. You need to explain what that is, not just say an economic reason. Okay, there's a big difference in that. But, those categories can help you simplify it. Boom, I can answer this question. Hey, before we even touch documents, right? And this is kind of what should be going on in your brain. You've analyzed the question, you're coming up, you might even have categories already. You might have 3 good categories. Write those down, turn them into a thesis as quickly as you can, and maybe you can go back and tweak that thesis depending on what the documents say. But we're good to go as far as analyzing the question. The next thing you really need to do is to start making a list of things in that time period that will help you discuss this in an informed way, right? Remember, you're trying to prove that you know American history. And so you're going to do that by giving evidence. And you're trying to prove that you know how to think historically and back up what you're saying with evidence. Okay, so from 1865 to 1910, you're thinking about America's role in the world. Okay, I want you to take a minute and you can pause the video and start coming up with ideas of what America's role in the world was. Okay, let you pause the video and let me rephrase that question. Come up with specific facts, key terms, things like that in this time period that would help you answer this question. Okay, so pause the video and come up with a list, and I'll kind of give you some of mine. Okay, so off the top of my head, totally off the top of my head, when I think of this time period, I think of, and America's relationship with the world, I think of immigration. The world is moving to America. Okay? And they're doing so because of industrial expansion. I think of new immigrants coming in as opposed to old immigrants. When I think of new immigrants, I think of people from Italy, and I think of Eastern European Jews. And I also think of surge in Asian immigrants and Chinese immigrants. The building the railroad and things like that. So those are the things that come to my mind. And immediately you should be thinking, like, in this time period, were there any kind of wars that we're talking about? Well, it's the end of the Civil War, so that might be good for context, but let's put that off for now. What was going on in 1865 to 1910? There's wars with Native Americans that where we expand and gain more and more control over the continent. Okay, that might come up, but it's not really to do with the rest of the world. New states. We took Hawaii. That is an area that was foreign that became part of the United States. That might be important. By the end of this era, or by 1898, the Spanish-American War, and we defeat a major power. Okay, that should, we gain a bunch of land from it, like Puerto Rico and the Philippines. Okay, these things should all be in your head. We fought against the Filipinos after we gained the Spanish-American War. With there's a major leader of Emilio Gualdonado that was a Filipino leading troops against the Americans because they didn't want to be occupied by the United States. You had people within the United States that were against our imperialism, but you had presidents, and you're talking about this time period, so the president that really stands out in this time period would be a guy like Teddy Roosevelt. I was very much in favor of the United States expanding role overseas. Speaking of Roosevelt makes me think of things like the Great White Fleet that he sent out. He was also, built the Panama Canal in this time period. And Roosevelt also, brokered a peace treaty between Russia and Japan. It's all in this time period. 1910, it falls short of the Wilson administration, so we don't have to talk about Wilson at all. There's other things that we could talk about. It falls short of World War I, so we're not getting into World War I or World War II. But seems like we got plenty to talk about. Okay, so that's the process that should be going on. Whether or not whether or not it all happens in your head or whether you're looking at things that you've written down. Either way, it's fine. But I would literally have a piece of paper by me where you are jotting those things down, so that you can kind of go back and look, and say, oh yeah, I need to talk about, if you had the brain power to think of Emilio Gualdonado, right? Okay, I need to put him in my paper. Teddy Roosevelt, I need to put him in my paper. Spanish-American War, that needs to be in my paper. And so you kind of have this list of things that you're going to talk about. Some of them might be super directly in the documents, but some of them might just be kind of hinted in the document, and what you talk about is going to help you explain the document really well. Okay, so you'd be, that's kind of the process of the question. I'm thinking what we have done in the last 10 minutes, with me explaining to you, you can kind of do in the first, 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, you really need to get started writing, but in the first few minutes, you analyze the question, you make sure you know what it's asking, you kind of come up with what might be, categories and for a thesis, and then you kind of come up with a list of things that, specific things that you're going to talk about in your essay. Every paragraph needs to have those things, as well as, the paragraphs also need to use the documents. Okay, so for these DBQs, you're going to be given 5 documents. You're going to need to use 4, because it's a shortened version of the test that they've given you before. I'm not going to go through all these documents, but let me go through, or let me look at one. Let me pull this up. Give me just, that's good enough. Okay, you can see the date here, 1898. It says bill of fare, and it has it's like a menu. And this is Uncle Sam at a restaurant, and you can see right here it says McKinley. This is President William McKinley. Because of the date, that should trigger to you that this is talking about, and you can look and see, there's Puerto Rico, there's Cuba, the Philippines, Sandwich Islands. This is clearly a reference to the Spanish-American War. Here's the thing, though. They never tell you that. They give you this document hoping that you are savvy enough to talk about the Spanish-American War and connect this document to it. Okay? Because that would really be sourcing the document, giving the historical situation that produces the document. And that's kind of what they try to do with these with these images a lot of times. Now, they might be a chart or a graph, but they're going to give you at least one document that is a historical image that is not a text-based document. 1 out of 5. I think that they're almost always a golden opportunity to do things like source the document, because you're not having to explain what somebody said, you're having to explain what's in the picture. And so you would say something like 1898 comic from whatever magazine, the Boston Globe, shows Uncle Sam ordering at a restaurant from McKinley, trying to decide which to take first of these foreign countries. And so you're going to talk about the Spanish-American War. You might even talk about the point of view of the document. It seems to me that the point of view is showing America as this, and Uncle Sam is this sort of greedy imperialist, eating at this nice restaurant, deciding which country to take, deciding whose freedoms to take, whose self-determination to take. And so the document seems to be putting down American imperial ambitions overseas after the Spanish-American War. Okay, if you kind of dig into that kind of thing, that's you could basically have a paragraph where you're really just analyzing this and connecting it to your thesis, connecting to your argument. And it could be very rich and very well done and get you some points for things like sourcing the document, giving outside information, using your document as evidence, all these things to give you points on the essay. Okay, so that's certainly, look at a document closely, especially if it's a picture. Try to figure out where they're coming from, trying to figure out the historical circumstance that produced it. Okay, and it's going to be some sort of you're needed to mention some specific, historical event, episode, person, whatever. Not just say something generally like America got involved with other countries. Okay, well, that doesn't say anything. This is talking about us really taking possession of a lot of other countries as a result of the Spanish-American War. It's a clear reference to that kind of involvement. Okay, so that is kind of deeply going deep into a document. And that's something that you're going to need to do. You can't do it with all of them though. Try to use at least 4 documents, but go deep into 2 if possible. And that's really kind of what you're being asked to do as far as this essay is concerned. I don't think I'm going to go through any of the documents. I know we use this in class. We haven't written this DBQ, but yeah, there's I'm not gonna go into anything specific with that, but oh, sorry, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about. I'm sorry, this is kind of a little bit disorganized. Okay, so let's back up to the very beginning and say you get the question, you analyze it, make sure you know it. Second step, you kind of come up with a list of historical things to talk about. Write it down on a scratch sheet of paper. Oh, Spanish-American War, Roosevelt, this and this and this, whatever. Okay, that goes into that time period. Boom. Those are the first 2 steps. And then as you're writing, you have your first paragraph is going to be establishing context, writing a thesis. Okay. So, America involvement in the world. Context. This begins in 1865 to 1910. How could you put this in context? Well, I think, what my rule of thumb on this is, what happened right before? And what does it have to do with America and the world? So not just what happened right before. Yes, there was a Civil War. But how can you connect the Civil War to America's involvement in the world? And I think it's not that hard to do. Certainly you can describe the Civil War. You could perhaps talk about, and you're going to do this in 2 or 3 sentences. You're not going to do this in like a bunch of paragraphs. But you can talk about how, America was already at the time of the Civil War this major cotton producer, and the South even believed that cotton could secure diplomacy with other countries and get them independence in the Civil War. So America was already, really involved in trade with other countries even before the Civil War. You could talk about how, America before this time was a emerging industrial nation with a lot of immigrants coming in. And that even increased in this time period. So America was just very much involved as an immigration destination. If that, especially if you talk about that in your essay. You could even maybe talk about how foreign policy wise the United States before this time was at least semi-isolationist, not heavily involved in European affairs. You could point to things like the Monroe Doctrine or George Washington Farewell Address. Neither of these two things were rock solid, like established that we would never go mess with other countries. We did sometimes. But in both of those cases, America was really encouraged itself not to involve itself in the affairs of European politics in particular, and the rest of the world in general, in this political, geopolitical way. Um, and so that could be context. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. You talk about specifically the Civil War, and how, you know, like I said, Southern diplomacy tried to secure, um, you know, help from the British because of cotton, or just, you could even make the connection that our concerns were much more domestic in the time of the Civil War rather than um, afterwards. But you can go different routes with this. So just kind of go back, Civil War and back before then, the 1800s to the 1865, and what is America's role in the world, and then, so bring it into the question. So it's not sufficient just to say, before this time there was a big Civil War and talk about the Civil War. No, it needs to connect to the question of America's involvement in the world. If you can connect those things, then, and write more than just a passing sentence or a passing reference, then you get a context point. Okay, so you got your context, you got your thesis, you got outside evidence to write about, and then you start digging into those documents, and especially if you feel like you understand the document that is non-text related, I think it's a golden opportunity to dig into things like point of view and historical situation and all that kind of stuff. Because there's usually a lot being said in there that's not obvious, and so it allows you to kind of go deeper. If you don't understand a document, just move right along. There's no reason to talk about a document you do not understand. Okay? Make sure, as we've always mentioned before, make sure that the documents you reference when you talk about them, Doc 1, Doc 2, whatever it might be. And also, do not treat the documents as documents that the reader has at their disposal. Write as if the reader did not have this document in front of them. So explain where this is coming from. Okay? So you would not just say, and Josiah Strong says this, or, Doc 2 said that the Anglo-Saxon race, blah, 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 blah. No, you could say something like, in a book, titled Our Country by Josiah Strong, or an 1885 book named Our Country, written by Josiah Strong, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you don't just assume that the person has it. That's not good writing. That's not clear. You never assume. It's your job to explain to the reader that you know what you're talking about, and that you can explain what these documents mean, say, and their background, and the point of view, and that kind of stuff. Okay, so don't just assume that they have it in front of them. They do, but you're being tested on your ability to explain in your writing. Okay, so you don't say, when you get to this one that we looked at more closely, you don't just say, something about Uncle Sam ordering at a restaurant. No, you would say, in a comic that shows Uncle Sam ordering at a restaurant, blah, 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 blah. You don't just assume that they know it's a comic. Okay, that's just a few notes on the DBQ. I hope this was helpful. Keep me from having to do this in the live session. So anyway, you guys have a DBQ on Friday. It will be a test grade. I hope it goes well for you, and I hope you do a good job on it. God bless.